Hi, everybody. So, first person we're talking about is one of the great poets of the 20th century, William Butler Yeats. I say of the 20th century because most of his well-known works were written in the early 20th century. He had a tumultuous life. This is the woman that he loved and inspired many of his poems, Maud Gonne. He proposed to Maud many different times and was rejected. She married an Irish patriot um, for whom the speculation is that William Butler Yeats harbored a grudge. And when we read a poem like No Second Troy, and in fact many of Yeats' other poems, I think it's not wrong to think about Maud. Why should I blame her that she filled my days with misery, or that she would of late have taught to ignorant men most violent ways, or hurled the little streets upon the great, had they but courage equal to desire? What could have made her peaceful with a mind that nobleness made simple as a fire, with beauty like a Titan bow, a kind that is not natural in an age like this, being high and solitary and most stern? Why, what could she have done, being what she is? Was there another Troy for her to burn? So, definitely a muse. They were for the most part, lifelong friends. His last proposal to her came, I believe, in 1917, um, and he expected that she would reject him, and she did, and he kind of wanted to at that point. He ended up marrying a much younger woman, and they had two children together. So the last thing I want to mention about Yeats is so many of his poems are referenced and quoted by other writers and poets. The Second Coming is perhaps his most famous poem, so be sure you read it carefully. It's definitely one that I could excerpt in your midterm. It begins turning and turning, turning and turning the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. And I go ahead and continue it. The poem ends, and what rough beast? Its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born. It's a very disturbing poem, one that we're going to look at a little bit more closely in the discussion board. The final poem that I'm going to talk about in this video, I think I also assigned you Easter, 1916, is Sailing to Byzantium, because it's one that sometimes students struggle with a little bit. And so I provided this quote. I'm trying to write about the state of my soul, he says. This poem was written in 1927, and he's already an old man. For it is right for an old man to make his soul, and some of my thoughts about the subject I have put into a poem called Sailing to Byzantium. When Irishmen were illuminating the Book of Kells and making the jeweled croziers in the National Museum, Byzantium was the center of European civilization and the source of its spiritual philosophy. So I symbolized the search for the spiritual life by a journey to that city. The poem famously begins, "That is no country for old men," which of course Cormac McCarthy took as a title for his novel of that name. We'll look also pretty carefully at this poem. We're going to try to do some close reading together in this week's discussion forum, and I'm looking forward to that. I hope you enjoy William Butler Yeats' poetry. It's powerful. It is complex. It's deeply moving. All right, everybody, we'll be chatting more in the discussion board about William Butler Yeats, and the next video is going to talk a little bit about James Joyce.